Hello and welcome back to part 2 of CBT and you. Well, if you can, the thing to do now, or you can do it later, or maybe you've already done it. But if you like, you can post something on the discussion board for this day, day 6, about your experience with CBT now or later or not at all. Again, lots of flexibility here. If doing the CBT with yourself is a meaningful thing for you, if it's something that you wanted to try, that you did try, or you made some personal discoveries, it would be great to share a little bit of that on the discussion board. All right, what did you do with your break? So here's what I did. One of the things I did was there was a chirping in our smoke alarm, smoke detectors. And I don't know about anyone else, but I have never in the history of time actually been able to change a battery in a smoke detector and then have it stop chirping. Every time I've ever done it, it just keeps on chirping. It's like, well, maybe the other batteries are dead too, the new batteries I've put in. Anyway, so that was pretty exciting. And then I went to log in and my computer, the Zoom program told me that the host had disabled my screen sharing when I tried to share my screen on my own computer, and I am the host. Anyway, all I'm saying is that sometimes things happen and they're annoying things. And that's one time that I find I'm a little bit resistant to doing CBT with myself during these times, probably when I need it the most. And so just a little personal share and anecdote. Let's keep rolling. Let's talk a little bit about like what happens in the world, what happens that triggers you. We talk about triggering or being activated and things like that. Well, it is true. There are situations, there are people, sometimes there are our own thoughts that are self-perpetuating or triggering. So one of the steps of self-awareness or awareness in the service of CBT is to get to know your triggers, to know what is it that's really going to push my buttons. With teenagers, I just ask them, what pisses you off? What really makes you angry? But it might be triggers that make you sad or guilty or scared. Those are the big 4 challenging emotions that pop up and usually are directly linked to, in one way or another, directly linked to our thoughts. So think of triggers, maybe insults, maybe when someone says something demeaning, maybe we even perceive some things to be demeaning when they really aren't. It's possible. I know because you're teachers that maybe parents can be triggers. Maybe certain things parents say and do can be triggers. Maybe students can be triggers. Maybe certain kinds of students or certain kinds of student behaviors are triggers. Maybe your administration is a trigger. Maybe some of your coworkers are triggers. And when I say triggers, I mean they just say and do things or behave in ways that get in under our skin and that cause us to have an unsettled response, a disturbing response, an unpleasant response. Racial injustice is something that is triggering for many people. I have other things here listed. Some of these for college students, I had them think about parties, alcohol, drugs, and pop quizzes. Maybe pop quizzes were triggering. Certain family events. I know with holidays coming up, when they are coming up, people often will feel like, oh, I'm going to have to spend Thanksgiving with my family, and there will be arguments or discomfort or awkwardness. So what happens in the world and what happens inside of yourself that you find to be triggering? Exploring that can be useful for our self-awareness. And here's why. Because if we know what's going to, quote, piss us off, then we can be ready for it. Now, the funny thing is, most of us approach this completely in the opposite way. And I think it's perfectly natural. It's like when your romantic partner, you know your romantic partner well enough, you know the things that your romantic partner does that really gets under your skin. And what we often do is watch for it. And then when it happens, we're really ready to say something and to be angry or to be unhappy. Uh, Interestingly, I have come to the conclusion that if it's something about my romantic partner that I know will likely annoy me, I think to myself, well, if I know it's going to annoy me, then I should be able to prepare myself for that and have a better and different response. Because typically in romantic relationships, if I react with annoyance and anger at something that annoys me, it often doesn't go well. So I find that often we do that backwards. And I know my tendency is to do it backwards also, but occasionally I can have an insight and think, wait a minute, this is something that happens all the time. And as a consequence, it's really not worth overreacting to. So some more strategies, and this is related to what I was just talking about. When we know our triggers, we can in some ways prepare ourselves or talk ourselves through the challenging situation. And hopefully we can imagine, visualize, hope for our best possible response. Think it through. Think, well, when a parent leaves me a nasty email, what do I want as my best possible response? What's the best possible response for me related to my own values? So regardless of the person and what they say, I think we often have our own standards. And so to think through, how do I want to be when my students seem to ignore my instructions, or when my students don't turn in their homework, or when a parent blames me for the child not doing the homework? What is the way I want to respond that I will respect? So really to kind of do some self-reflection and then self-evaluation in terms of how you want to handle it, if it's your best version of yourself. So Donald Meichenbaum, the guy who developed self-instructional training, said, got 3 steps for dealing with difficult, stressful situations. The first is to prepare for the provocation. In other words, know your trigger and prep for it. So in this case, I have the example, a parent left a nasty email. How do I prepare? Relax. Maybe do some centering, some deep breathing, maybe talk it through with a colleague. Maybe then rehearse or practice the kinds of things that I want to say instead of reacting in the moment. Someone will, on parent-teacher night, some parent is likely to say something that might push a button for you. How do you want to respond? How do you prepare for it? Second step is coping in the moment. So preparation, obviously, good night's sleep, good nutrition, and exercise, some relaxation, a lot of good self-care, practice, all that's prep. But in the moment, we also need to have some specific ways in which we want to handle it. And what Meichenbaum says is we need to talk to ourselves in encouraging ways in the moment. So maybe by saying something to myself like, I don't need this to go perfectly, I'm doing fine, I will just focus on listening well. In other words, I won't argue, I'll listen well. And then maybe I'll think to myself, this too shall pass. This interaction will be over soon. And then the third step in this 3-step self-instructional training, or stress inoculation training is another term for it, is to use self-reinforcement and to say good things to ourselves, even for our efforts, even if we didn't succeed perfectly. I did all right. I survived. I focused. Maybe I used a good strategy that I had planned on using. And then you can see here, I say, I deserve a latte. Maybe you deserve something else. it's okay for you to intentionally reward yourself. In fact, as was written about in the Fog article about habits, giving yourself a high five or somehow celebrating your success is really powerful self-reinforcement. So that's self-instructional training or stress inoculation training, another strategy. Now, so this slide actually should come later, but it's a preview. How do we change our thinking? Of course, awareness. Ellis said we can question or dispute or argue. Stephen Hayes and the mindfulness-based cognitive therapists say, mindfully accept what happens, non-judgmentally, mindfully accept it. We can also talk ourselves through it, like I just was doing with the self-instruction training. Practice, practice, practice. So practice for the provocations. And now this next thing I'm going to talk about is the 3-step emotional change technique or trick. This is something that you had a reading on, and if you've already read, you can kind of fast forward through this, or it might be something you've heard me present on before. But I made this up because the thing that I discovered way back in the 1990s when I was working as a full-time private practitioner in Missoula, I got referred tons of kids, preteens and teens, and almost all of them were in bad moods. They would come into the office, but maybe they weren't happy to see me, but they were certainly not happy with their parents. They were unhappy probably at school. I just noticed that there was everybody I saw, almost all the kids I saw, were initially in bad moods. And so I developed this 3-step emotional change trick, and I would tell them about it, and I would say, is it okay with you? Well, I probably would lead with something like, has anybody ever told you to cheer up? So imagine me asking you that. I'm guessing if someone has told you to cheer up, you didn't like it. Almost no one likes being told to cheer up. You don't like it because it's invalidating. It's dismissing our feelings because somebody else wants us to somehow be happy, put a smile on our face. Usually we're feeling something for some reason. And so being told to cheer up just really misses the mark. Almost everyone hates it. So I would talk like that with the young person. Then I would say, well, so would you mind? I mean, I could share with you this trick I have about how if you want to change your mood, and I know sometimes, this is true for me, and maybe it's true for you, but sometimes I'll stay in a bad mood longer than I want to. And so it's good to have a trick to get yourself out of a bad mood if it's lingering longer than you want it to. And then I might ask the kid, have you ever been in a bad mood longer than you wanted to? Almost everybody says yes. And so then I say, well, okay, if it's okay with you, I'll teach you this 3-step emotional change trick that you can use on yourself, if and when you feel like cheering up. And I promise you, I am never going to tell you to cheer up because you've told me you hate it. I'm not going to do it. So you ready? Step 1. Step 1 is to identify and honor the feeling. And usually I would talk with, I've done presentations. Usually the age ranges that I presented to were 4th, 5th, and 6th graders around how to do the 3-step emotional change technique, the whole classroom presentations. And I remember one, I think it was a 4th grade class in particular. I was doing this. I said, so step 1, how do you honor your feeling? Because feelings are rational. They come from somewhere. So how do you honor, how do you feel the feeling? And, kids would say, oh, when I'm mad, I yell, or I rip up paper, or when I'm sad, I cry, or when I'm scared, I just sort of hide under my covers. And yeah, they would say things like that. And it was great. And so then I'd say, and I would say the same to you. How do you let yourself feel it? Because it is so important. Think about that. How do you let yourself honor and feel the feeling? Because your feelings, your emotions have meaning. And the second step is to think a new thought or do something different. And so when I was in my practice, I would often take the kids who were in a bad mood down to the bathroom, and I had a big mirror in there. We would stand in front of the mirror and we'd make faces that were consistent with whatever we were feeling or the client was feeling. I remember one boy who was he was so angry, and he's like angry, and I said, well, let's just make really angry faces, because that's one way we can honor the anger. And I was trying to look as angry as I could, and the kid looks at me and says, "You don't look angry, you look constipated," which was a really good step 2 thing. And so I would find, just by going in front of a mirror and letting ourselves have time to make angry or sad or scared faces, that would often shift us to this step 2, where we were thinking new thoughts and maybe talking about things that were funny. But you can do jokes, or you can interact with pets, you can go for a walk outside, you do the thing that you know is going to help. And so, and I remember one boy named Eddie saying, I go to the mirror and I just smile, and that was beautiful. He had a beautiful smile, and I remember that vividly from that particular classroom. And so, do something different. And it can be just anything that moves you away from the old feeling. Step 3 is to spread the good mood. So once you're in a good mood, you should spread it to other people. It's nice. Emotions are a little bit contagious. Have you ever caught a bad mood from someone else? I think I have. I would bet you have. Have you ever caught a good mood from someone else? Maybe so. I hope so. The main thing is, you can spread the good mood, but you can't say cheer up. You cannot tell someone to cheer up. You have to think of, well, what are the other ways that I would like to help someone cheer up? Might mean doing them a favor. I often was talking with kids and about how they might spread the good mood to their parents. And I would have these standard things that I would say, well, just look for an opportunity when your mom or dad asks you to do something. Just look at them and say, okay, mom, or okay, dad, and do it. And I'll bet you that will make them happy. And I would say, well, like at some point when your parents talking, just look at them and say, you're right, dad, or you're right, mom. And I'll bet if you're honest and you really think they're right, they will really appreciate hearing that you think they're right. So, spreading good mood. Think about the ways in which you do that in your life. How do you help other people maybe feel more positive without coercing them or forcing them or implying that they should smile or cheer up? Oops, wrong way. And then step 4, and of course it's a 3-step technique, but it has 4 steps, because I usually would tell the kids emotions are complicated. So we have to have 4 steps, even though it's a 3-step technique. And kids would always be like, you only said there were 3 steps. Anyway, it was me being hilarious, of course. And then I would say, well, the 4th step is to teach someone the 3 steps. And I would have kids go and teach their younger siblings, was the most common thing. Sometimes they would teach their parents. I recently was doing a presentation. There was an 8-year-old kid in the back, whose mom had him perched in the back with a cell phone. And then she emails me the next morning and says, you probably saw me, I had to leave a little early, and my son was in the back with my phone, and somehow he absorbed the 3-step emotional change technique, and he taught it to his 5-year-old little sister in the morning, because she was having a bad hair day. And he had really listened to everything you said, because he said, I'm not telling you to cheer up. I'm just saying, if you want to feel better, I learned some, and it was one of those things that made me feel so good, even thinking about that. One other step 2 thing is you can tell jokes. And one of my favorite jokes, I know I already told you the one about the catatonic woman, but one of my favorite jokes to tell kids was, you ready? Why did the ant crawl up the elephant's leg for the 2nd time? I still like this. Because he got pissed off the first time. Ha ha ha. All right. That was step 2, but we're now in step 4, and now we're done. So some more CBT stuff. You know, it's really important for us to acknowledge we can influence, but we can't completely control the content of our thoughts, the direction of our thoughts, the positive or the negative affect or mood that's connected with the thoughts. So it's tough. We are imperfect at shaping our cognitions. And it's important for us to remember that and cut ourselves some slack because of that. I want to talk for a moment about the power of positive thinking because, of course, I've had people in class ask me, what do you think about manifesting? Or what do you think about vision boards or The Secret? And I have strong opinions about those things. But before I tell you my strong opinions, I want to tell you that I believe when I was in college, high school and college, I think I read every book that Norman Vincent Peale published. He was the author of You Can If You Think You Can and The Power of Positive Thinking, and a little known book that I think I was the only one who read called Sin, Sex, and Self-Control. Amazing. Anyway, I was a big fan of Norman Vincent Peale and positive thinking. I just am not that big a fan anymore. Because like when I read this top one by William Arthur Ward, it says, if you can imagine it, you can achieve it. If you can dream it, you can become it. That is just BS. That is just not true. I can imagine a ton of things that I cannot achieve. One of them, in my whole life, I imagined, I wished, I dreamt that I could dunk a basketball. Did I ever dunk a basketball? Well, not on a regulation 10-foot rim. One time I dunked one on a 9-foot, 10-inch rim, which I felt super good about. But I imagined it. I really worked at it. I didn't do it. I dreamt it. I dreamt at night. One time I was playing basketball with Bill and I dunked on him. So I dreamt it. I did not become it. Anyway, I think you all probably agree. It's a cool, inspirational poster. Never let go of your dreams. Are you kidding me? Of course, let go of your dreams. I am in my 60s. I had better let go of some of my dreams, or I am going to be just miserable, unhappy. You got to make adjustments, right? You got to make adjustments in your lives. Anyway, so not a big fan of the power of positive thinking, or You Can If You Think You Can, or vision boards, mostly because they're talked about in these very simplistic ways, when in fact, achievement and achieving goals really takes a lot of work. Positive thinking, is it a good thing? Absolutely, yes. It gives us some advantages because it helps us focus. It helps us move our attention in a direction, and it slightly improves goal setting. Just a little bit. Slightly improves our goal setting if we stay positive. Well, disadvantages, as you know from one of the readings, positive thinking is not necessarily rational thinking. We can sometimes think positive, but it's completely irrational and sets us up for hardship and disappointment. For example, if I visualize myself doing music or sports or art or teaching and having it go perfectly, I can imagine going down the ski hill and everything going perfectly. If I imagine those perfect performances, I will inevitably be disappointed because they will not go perfect. And so sometimes if you are doing too much positive visualization and it's all positive, it can set us up for frustration and disappointment that's hard to deal with because we were just imagining that everything was going to go perfectly. All right. So in the end, though, positive thinking, powerful, good tool, can increase our performance by some very small percentage. It's also not a secret and it's not magic. And it works best when we combine it with, of course, hard work, preparation, really good or smart goal setting, like we talked about before, and really good and solid plans for accomplishing our goals. So, all right, now you know what I think about positive thinking. So, there's another mental skill that we can use that often cognitive behavioral therapists use, sometimes ACT therapists use. A quick story about a pharmacist. There was a woman who went to a pharmacist and basically she hated him, and she found him to be the most insulting and rude and cold person she'd ever met. But she had to go because she had to get prescriptions filled. And she realized she had a friend who was also friends with the pharmacist. So she went to her friend and she said, look, I know you're friends with the pharmacist. He's a jerk. And I want you to tell him on my behalf that I think he's a jerk and he's stupid and he's rude and he should stop being that way. So the next time the woman goes into the pharmacy, he's super nice. And she's like, yes, my friend told him off. And so then she goes to the friend and she says, hey, I went in and I saw the pharmacist. So what did you tell him? Did you tell him that I told you that he was a jerk and he needed to start being nicer? And the friend says, oh, no, I didn't. I told him that you liked him. I love that story. It's the power of framing and shifting reality, which is really the foundation of some approaches to counseling called like narrative therapy and solution-focused therapy. A lot of that has to do with shifting the way we look at reality. And CBT is a little bit about that too. When I used to work a lot with parents and teenagers would, they'd be just like, I need more freedom. My parents, they won't let me do anything. I have to call them. I mean, they track me on my phone, blah, blah, blah. Right. And the parents are like, well, you have to earn responsibility and freedom, or freedom through responsibility. Right. And I remember I would reframe it and I'd turn to the teenager and the parent would be in the room and I'd say, hey, I just want to tell you, your mom has a disease, and it's a disease from which she will never recover. It's called the parent's disease, and what it is, the symptoms are your mom loves you, and she cannot stop thinking about you when you go out. And it's incurable. She will never stop loving you. She will never stop caring about you. She will never be able to stop thinking about you when you're out. And so we just got to cope with that. I mean, it's just a matter of, so let's figure out how many times you need to call her. What do you need to do in order to help her and you cope with this terrible disease that she has? Of course, I'm doing that a little tongue in cheek, but usually people will get the message that, in fact, the control or the need to know where the teenager is was coming from a place of love, and it wasn't going to change. And so let's reframe it and handle it differently. The history of reframing is also sometimes a little bit suspect. There are some radical therapists who used to try to reframe things that were like completely bizarre. There was a guy who had chased his wife around the house with an axe, and the therapist said when the wife reported it, he said, in counseling, he said, oh, it sounds like he was just trying to get closer to you. It's like, nah. The kid was setting fires in the house, and the interpretation or the reframe was, sounds like your son wants more warmth in the home. It's like, no, I mean, there's sometimes reframing just doesn't fit. But I encourage you to think about that particular approach and think about, are there some ways that I can reframe some of the challenges that I experience and face in life? And here are a couple of examples that I think are somewhat reasonable. when we fail, I fail all the time. I think instead of, obviously we have to feel sad about it and disappointed and all those things. That's just normal. And in addition, I think it's good to reframe it and to, well, what did I learn? How can I do this better? And so to reframe failure as not such a bad thing, but really instead as an opportunity to learn. And then romantic breakups. I have worked with a lot of people over the years who have been in relationships and who are having trouble getting over romantic breakups. And so sometimes asking them to take a step back metaphorically and to say, well, what did you learn about yourself in this relationship? What did you learn about what you like in relationships? What did you learn about what you like in relationship partners? How might you approach relationships differently? What's your takeaway? And of course, the temptation for the takeaway, especially if this is consistent with a core belief, is to say, I'm unlovable. I'm defective. No one wants to spend time with me. This is just confirmation of my negative core belief. To reframe it as an opportunity to learn about yourself, to learn about relationships, can be helpful. Often there needs to be a grieving period for the end of the relationship before people can start focusing very well on what they learned. The whole concept of narrative therapy, which is really in many ways a form of CBT, because the focus on narrative therapy or in narrative therapy is to identify what's the story, what's the narrative that you tell yourself about yourself, what's the narrative that you tell yourself about the world or other people, what's your role in the story or the narrative. Do you frame yourself in your life story as a strong, proactive person or as a victim? Oftentimes, the words we use to describe ourselves will tell us something about the ways in which we frame or cast ourselves in the roles of our lives. One goal that narrative therapists have is for us as clients, as humans, to rewrite or to revise our life stories, the subplots, with a little more freedom, a little more empowerment, maybe a little more vulnerability if that's something that can be viewed as desirable. Maybe to also focus and draw out some of the sparkling moments, some of the things we've learned, some of the ways we've grown strong. I think for people who've been through trauma, sometimes this sort of revising of the story of the traumatic abuse or experience and focusing on the ways in which people have grown stronger through the hard times can be really useful. Other ways in which we can practice narrative therapy or solution-focused therapy on ourselves. Solution-focused therapists often ask these presuppositional questions. One is called the miracle question, which goes basically like, what if a miracle happens and suddenly when you wake up in the morning, the problem that has been bugging you is now gone? It went away in the night. What will be the first thing you will notice is different or has changed that will tell you, oh, the problem has gone away? One of the goals of this kind of presuppositional question is to get people focusing in on goals. And it's based on the idea that the more people think about and hash out and are specific about the goals and the ways they want things to be, the more they think about it, the more likely it is to happen. Another question that solution-focused therapists ask a lot are exception questions. So when does the problem happen less? When are you more successful, more comfortable, and more confident? So I know I'm going through some of these things pretty quickly. I'm going to hopefully finish up here soon. I can see here I'm quoting Tina Fey now, which usually means that I've decided it's time for an intellectual break. Tina Fey wrote, I was a little excited, but mostly blorfed. Blorfed is an adjective I just made up that means completely overwhelmed, but proceeding as if everything is fine and reacting to the stress with the torpor of a possum. Pretty cool. I think it's possible for us to sometimes just be creative and silly when we're trying to cope with the challenges and the troublesome thoughts that come into our heads. One more last main focus, and that is language creates and punishes. One of the things that Stephen Hayes writes about and believes is that language is one of the things that we use on ourselves that is naturally problematic, that we label and use language on ourselves in ways that make us feel worse. Now, language, of course, is one of the ways that we make meaning. It's a way we exchange information. That's why, and part of the reason why, reframing and restoring work. But we also use language to punish ourselves. One of the famous phrases that a famous person once wrote was, "Words were originally magic." Originally magic because they would cause people to have strong emotions. Words would cause people to be happy and sad, angry and at peace. The words are powerful. So I'm going to have us all together do an experiment right now. Here is the experiment. We're going to take this word fail because it's a potentially provocative word for some people. And I want you to think of all the qualities associated with the word fail. Like, what does it mean? What does it mean to you? What are some of the qualities? What are some of the implications of fail or failing or failure? And then what we're going to do is we're going to do this experiment where we repeat the word for 45 seconds. And so I'm going to be the timer, and ready, set, with me. I want you to say it out loud, even if there's someone in the room. Ready, set, go. Fail, 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 fail. Okay, I'm stopping. It's only been 30 seconds. I couldn't take it anymore. So usually what happens is once you start saying the word over and over again, it changes because it starts to just sound like some ridiculous sound and it loses some of its meaning. In 2009, a research team did a couple of studies, and they took undergraduates, of course. They generated a negative self-referential thought, and then they rated the thought or the word on its discomfort and its believability. So if the word was fail, how uncomfortable is the word fail? How believable is the word fail? And then they had them say the word repeatedly out loud for 1, 3, 10, 20, or 30 seconds. Now, this involved a bunch of different college students. And then they rated their emotional discomfort and believability of the word again. So here's what they found, was that the emotional discomfort of the word went down within 3 to 10 seconds, pretty quickly. The believability of the word took longer for it to go down. It took about 20 to 30 seconds, but then people stopped believing it. So what the researcher said was that the emotional discomfort and the believability that we associate with words may be sort of different constructs. But the main take home was we can defang some of the painful words that bite us or cause us pain. And I could give you some more examples, but I'm running low on time and I want to apologize for that. To apply this, pick a word that causes you stress. Play around with it with some of your students in class. Pick a word like the one that they used in the study was milk, M-I-L-K, milk. milk, 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 milk. Anyway, it's a fun experiment. Sometimes young people, when they do this, will feel like, oh, wait, I can kind of move past some of those words. They don't have to affect me the way that they do. Take home point, main point is, how do we get away from the negative power of words? Other people will say challenging, painful, insulting words to us, and we will say some to ourselves. And how do we take back the power over those? One last thing, I lied before. As it turns out, core beliefs like that you're unlovable, that you're flawed, that you're unintelligent, that there's something wrong with you. Those core beliefs are really pretty tough to change. In an ideal world, we'd go back and we'd rip out those core beliefs and we'd replace them with more adaptive beliefs. Turns out they come back. They're like bad weeds. They grow back. They gain more power. But awareness and work will help us to recognize and then develop a way of coping, not only with parents or administrators or students who provoke us, but we can become better because we know, we can predict some of these core beliefs will just keep coming. I have one phrase that just comes to me when I'm upset. I'll think, how can you be so stupid, John? And I think to myself, where does that come from? Because I actually have pretty good evidence that I'm not stupid. I know I'm going to say that to myself. And now those are just words and they don't really impact me in the ways in which they used to. So I encourage you to notice some of your core beliefs that may be pretty negative, and then to say to yourself, even if I can't get rid of them, if by chance I cannot get rid of these core beliefs that torment me, maybe I can develop a good strategy for coping with the difficult core beliefs. All right, concluding comments. You can deal with problematic, troublesome, pesky thoughts by doing CBT with yourself, by getting in your own head and countering or accepting negative thoughts, by using self-instruction and coping strategies for provocation, by thinking positive, by visualizing success, but being realistic, by reframing your experiences to amplify the positive, to creating better narratives, more adaptive narratives about ourselves, noticing when we have sparkling moments or good things in our lives. We can disrupt some of the language-based negativity, and we can ask ourselves exception and presuppositional questions. So those are some of the concluding comments. Homework reminder, day 6, all about CBT for you. I do have a short 3-step emotional change technique article